What is going on, Cadillac family? Welcome back to the channel, previews and vlogs. All right, so today we are back on the CTS. Now, I made a video about 2-3 weeks ago on replacing the brakes. Of course, I put the Power Stop Z26s. There was a little issue with the brakes. I didn't really post that on any of the Facebook forums just because enough people have done brakes on these cars and I just thought it was just kind of overdoing it anyways. But if you guys want to check that video out, I have the link up to the description right up here so you guys check that out. But anyways, today we are back with the CTS, the V Sport, and it's time to replace the shocks. And I'm not just saying that because I want to replace the shocks. The car has 60,000 miles on it, for one. Two, when I was doing the brakes, I noticed that the right rear shock was completely wet. The bottom portion of the shock, where basically the spring seat is at, or lower control arm, whatever you want to call it, was all wet with fluid, and that was coming from the actual the right rear shock. So it was time to do them. Now, I don't like doing them one at a time. I actually do them in pairs. Same thing when I do brakes. I either do all four or just do two, the front ones. Same thing with tires. Kind of like same thing when I put shoes on. I put them both on. Don't put only one on. So I'm gonna be doing both rear shocks today. The front ones are actually good. Also, another way you could actually feel and tell that if your shocks are bad is if you're driving down the street and that back end or front end is too bouncy, it doesn't feel right anymore. So my front end on this car actually feels really good. When you drive, it responds quickly, it bounces back quickly, it's still a smooth feeling, but that back end feels like I got coilovers. It feels like I got some different type of suspension and the car's just really bouncy and stiff and just kind of doesn't feel right anymore. So of course, again, that's because the right rear shock is completely lost its fluid. And again, it's pretty bad, and I'll show you guys when we take everything apart how bad it actually is. And then of course I'm gonna do the left side as well, but I'm gonna probably do that one off camera. But I'm gonna show you guys how to do these shocks, and they're very easy. Probably maybe 30 minutes tops for both sides. It doesn't take very long. Probably one of the easiest shocks I've ever done. So without any more interruptions, let's go ahead and find out what tools we're gonna be using to remove this, and we'll get the shocks out of this car. Tools you will be needing for this project are going to be a 7mm socket, a 19mm socket, and a 15 deep well socket. You're also gonna need a 3/8 ratchet or a 1/2-inch ratchet, or in my case, I'm gonna be using impact drivers. You'll also need a torque wrench to torque everything down at the end. You're gonna need a screwdriver, a flathead preferably, or if you have some way to remove plastic clips, a plastic clip remover, a T15 Torx bit, and it goes without saying, jacks and a jack stand. So the first thing we're gonna do is remove the inner fender liner on the wheels. Now GM was not very consistent when they did this. They literally combined Torx bits, plastic clips, plastic screws, and 7mm screws just to hold on this fender liner. I mean, seriously, they just threw everything at this thing they could. They probably were running out of parts and just threw it in there. Anyways, once you remove the inner liner, you're gonna remove this plastic cover. This cover is actually for the spring mount or the lower control arm. There are 4 clips on here. You're gonna use that screwdriver to remove the clips. Once you get that out of the way, you have access to pretty much all the bolts. You'll see 3 bolts on the very top by the mount, and then the bottom bolt that holds onto the actual shock, onto the spring seat. Now you wanna unplug this cable right here. Now you're gonna do that by basically taking the little gray tab with your fingernail and pushing it outwards, and then pushing down on the clip and pulling away from it, and that'll disconnect that. First one you want to undo is the 19mm socket. Once you get that one undone, you could take off the 3 15mm bolts that are up top. You're going to use that by using your 15mm deep well socket as well. So the shock is finally out, and let's take a look at this thing, how bad this actually was. Also, just remember, always have the jack underneath it, because before you take that bottom bolt out, that shock has pressure and it's pushing down because the car's jacked up and it's holding and standing on the jack stand. So those basically shocks are kind of just laying down all the way, and your suspension's kind of sagging. So you want to kind of release some of that pressure from that lower bolt, so when you basically release it, it pops right out, because if not, you may strip the bolts or you may have a hard time getting it out. So you want to relieve some of that pressure by just putting a jack right underneath the control arm where the spring is at. So just put your jack right under there, just a little bit, just doesn't need a lot of pressure to push up on it, and it pushes up enough. But anyways, let's take a look at this and see how bad this actually was. Look at this thing. This thing completely leaked out. Look at this. And I already took out the driver's side. The driver's side wasn't so bad. Did that off of camera. It still had some leakage, not bad though. But look at this thing. This thing is gone. And you could tell that right here as well. On this cover here, which is for the lower spring mount, look at that. Look how wet that is with all that fluid that leaked out of it. That thing had nothing left on it. And it's all wet in here. You guys can't see it, but all in here it's wet, just full of fluid. Look at it. It's just completely full of fluid. So I'm gonna have to clean all this up before reinstalling the new one. But that's that easy to get the shocks out on the back on these cars. Not hard at all. The only one that gives you a problem is these stupid little clips on here. But other than that, the job is pretty simple. And I do want to apologize. I do want to apologize for the background noise. There's my neighbors are noisy. I got the kids out on that side playing around, and they're just really, really noisy. So apologies for the background noise, but I'm going to get that cleaned up, and then pretty much reinstallation. I'm going to show you how to reinstall it, but it's the reverse. The only thing is you got to install that bottom bolt first, jack up the car, or jack up the spring until it lines up with the top 3 bolts, and you're good to go. So I'm going to get this cleaned up, and then once that is done, I'll come back and show you guys how to reinstall that back on there. All right, so it's all cleaned up. I got it all clean. I even cleaned the shield here that was all nasty. There's all the nastiness in there. Here's the new shock. Now on these shocks, of course, you'll have your plate. It comes with everything already, the backing plate. One side says left, right. This side says L. Don't worry about it because I got confused. When it came packed, it came like this. And when I looked at it, this side said L and this one said R. I'm like, how the hell is there an L and an R? But it's because it's pretty much, you could flip it around either way you want, whichever side you need. But it already comes pre-assembled. All we got to do is install this. Now, again, when installing it, you got to put the bottom bolt in first, and you could adjust the height of that the lower support with your jack that you have hooked up just like this one. So as right before I'm installing it, put the bolt in and kind of jack up a little bit. Once you get the bolt through, tighten it down. Then you'll be able to bring the jack upwards and then be able to get into these 3 studs to connect the rest of the shock on there. It's that simple. So let's go ahead and get started putting this shock in. The driver's side is already done. You guys will show you guys how that looks. I didn't put the fender well back in there, so just to show you guys. But this one's already done. It's got a whole new one in there. Again, those nuts and the bolt in here is a one-time use, so I did order new ones from GM. So make sure before you do this job, you guys order those. Unlike me, I'm sitting here putting on the old ones. They are one-time use. So just make sure you order those before you start this job. So let's go ahead and finish this job and get this video over with. Now we're gonna grab the new shock and we're gonna start by putting the bottom screw in first. Once you put the bottom screw in, you could actually adjust the height of this by putting jack underneath the vehicle and jacking up the car. So your jack should be free by now because you should be holding up the car with jack stands. So go ahead and jack up the car, and I got my assistant helping me out here, my son. And he's gonna be jacking up the car as the bolts fall right in line with the holes, and then you can screw in the nuts. Once you get all that done and screwed down, go ahead and you could torque them down. The top mounting bolts are 43 foot-pounds, and the bottom one is 105 foot-pounds. Go ahead and plug in the connector, and you're all done. All right, so now it's all done. We got the new shock mounted on there for you. One thing I will say, you can tighten down the bottom bolt here if you want. What I would suggest doing is not tighten it all the way. Just tighten it, leave it a little bit loose so you kind of wiggle this one around so you get those in there. Now, again, you got to use a jack to kind of adjust for everything, because if you don't use the jack, what's going to happen is you're going to end up pretty much either stripping or hitting those threads on the studs or damaging the bolt that's going in here. So just be careful. When you do this, take your time, be patient. And again, it's not a hard job whatsoever. If you have help with somebody being able to lower and raise the jack for you, that's even better, because that way you could kind of mess around with this here while somebody up lowers and raises the jack as needed. But that is it. It's all done. We just got to torque everything down now. I already torqued this side out. Now, to torque these in here, they're 43 foot-pounds. I used a series of extensions to be able to torque them, to reach them. And the bottom one here is a pain because that's 105 foot-pounds, or 100 foot-pounds actually. And that one is a pain because, of course, since I'm not in a lift, I can't get all the way underneath the car, so I have to be under the car physically to be able to torque that down, and that is a pain to do. So I'm going to torque these right here, and again, what I did is I have a series of extensions that I set up. Look at this. 1, 2, 3 extensions to be able to reach in there with the torque wrench, torque those 3, and then I have to get under the car and torque those bottom ones. But I will come back once it's done, and then we'll go for a ride, and I'm going to see how it feels. And again, I did not drive the car prior to doing this on the video, but I can assure you that this car felt like it was on coilovers. Like, it felt so bad. It felt like the magnetic ride wasn't even working. And again, because it wasn't, because there was no fluid in there. But it was really, really bad. And it wasn't that Cadillac ride that you normally feel. Even though I got 19-inch with low profiles, you still have that nice ride on these cars. Anyways, oh yeah, and yes, I did forget to plug that in. I plugged that in after I torque all the lugs to make sure I don't damage that connector. But let me go ahead and finish this up, and I'll be back to you guys once it is all done, and we'll go for a ride. All right, so I've been driving the car for about a good 15 minutes or so now, and night and day difference, to be honest with you guys. So, I mean, the car felt like it had a ton of bricks in the back, and it was just not responsive. When you hit a bump, it didn't bottom out, but it was just really heavy, really hard riding, really bouncy. Again, I knew it was gonna be the shocks, and of course, when I did the brakes and I saw the shocks were completely just soaked, especially the right side, the passenger rear. It's, you know, the left side was right along with it. It's starting to leak as well. So both rear shocks done, and now this car feels 100%. The front feels good, but I might do those probably next year, just for the heck of it. For now, everything feels good though, and again, it's an easy install. More dirty than everything other than that because of all the dirt and dust that falls out of the fender liner. It got pretty much dust all over me. But other than that, very simple install, nothing to it. So, but I did have a question for everybody on the Cadillac pages here. And I don't know if anybody out there has had this issue. Let me know in the comments below if you've had this issue. So this car is going to be driven to Florida here in July, which is about 3 weeks. We got a family trip. My wife and the baby are flying. I put them in a plane, and me and my son decided to drive this car. We decided to take this car specifically because I just want to take it out there. I want to give it a cruise. I want to stretch his legs out, whatever you want to say. And I've been getting it ready. Shocks, brakes, but there's only one problem. My AC doesn't work all the time. Here's the problem with the AC, and if you guys know what the problem is, you can guide me in the right direction. It would be very appreciative of everybody here. The AC goes from cold and ice cold to a lukewarm, moist air through the vents. Now, it's been happening for 2 years, and pretty much it's like at the beginning of summer it's perfectly fine, and then all of a sudden it goes into this just warm air, and it goes back and forth in the drive. So in a 15-minute drive, it'll just switch back and forth, and you put your hand on the vents, you can feel the moisture in there. If anybody's had that issue, Cadillac has looked at this car twice. Both times they've told me it was the expansion valve. They replaced it, and it still does the same thing. It doesn't change. So I'm taking it into another dealer, completely different than what I normally take it to get a second opinion and see what they say. But if you guys know anything about that, let me know. I would love to see if you guys, point me in the right direction with that. But other than that, like I said, if you guys did like the video, go ahead and hit that like button, hit the subscribe button as well. I'll see you guys on my next video. Peace.